You know, we have this peculiar idea that spiritual growth means becoming more connected to the world around us, more social, more engaged, more present in the hustle of human affairs. But I don't mean the superficial version of connection we see plastered across social media, all those curated moments of togetherness. I mean when you really begin to see how consciousness itself changes the way you experience everything you once found normal. And here's what nobody tells you. The more awake you become, the less the old world fits. Do you ever feel like you're slowly fading from a reality that everyone else still believes in? Nobody tells you this, but there's a particular loneliness that comes with waking up. You start noticing things, the scripts people recite without thinking, the games they play without knowing they're playing them, the suffering they perpetuate while calling it success. And suddenly, the dinner parties feel hollow. The small talk feels excruciating. The career achievements that once motivated you now seem like elaborate distractions from what's actually real. You find yourself canceling plans, stepping back from friendships that once felt essential, spending more time alone, not because you're depressed, but because solitude has become the only place where you can breathe without pretending. Do you ever feel that instant exhaustion when someone asks what you've been up to, knowing they want the acceptable answer, not the truth? Here's where the danger begins. You start wondering if something's wrong with you, if you're becoming antisocial, disconnected, and somehow broken. What if I told you that everything we've been taught about connection and belonging is backwards? That your withdrawal isn't a symptom of failure, but a sign of profound awakening? Let me share with you 5 things about why highly conscious people vanish from the world. They once lived, and why this disappearance might be the most natural thing in the universe. The first thing you must understand is that consciousness doesn't just change what you think, it changes what you can tolerate. Think about it. When you were a child, you could watch the same cartoon 100 times and never get bored. But as you grew, your capacity for complexity increased, and suddenly those cartoons felt simplistic, repetitive, and empty. The same thing happens with consciousness, but on a much deeper level. It's like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. Once you've tasted the vastness of deeper awareness, once you've experienced even a glimpse of what lies beneath the surface of conventional reality, going back to purely surface-level interactions becomes physically uncomfortable, not because you're judging others, but because you literally can't unsee what you've seen. You're sitting at brunch, listening to someone complain about their Instagram engagement, and part of you wants to scream, "Don't you see? None of this is real. We're playing dress-up in a cosmic game, and you're upset about the accessories." I once knew someone who'd spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder, winning guards, and making impressive money. Then, one day, after what he called a moment of clarity during a simple walk in the woods, he couldn't go back. Not wouldn't. Couldn't. He'd sit in meetings listening to people argue passionately about market share and quarterly projections, and he'd feel like an alien observing a strange tribal ritual. Within 6 months, he'd vanished from that entire world. His colleagues thought he'd had a breakdown. He knew he'd had a breakthrough. Here's the profound part. Your nervous system is recalibrating to a different frequency. It's not that you're choosing to reject the old world, your entire being is naturally moving away from vibrations that no longer match your internal state. This is why highly conscious people vanish. They're not running away. They're being pulled toward coherence. The second thing, and this is even more important, is that awakening reveals the exhausting performance of identity. We spend our entire lives building and maintaining a character, a persona we present to the world. We learn the right things to say, the appropriate emotions to display, and the socially acceptable ways to exist. But consciousness is like a spotlight that suddenly illuminates the stage, and you see yourself as an actor playing a role you never consciously auditioned for. Think of it as a stage play, where you've been so absorbed in your character that you forgot you were acting. Then one day, mid-scene, you look down and see the script in your hands. You notice the lights, the painted backdrop, and the other actors reciting their lines. The spell is broken. And here's the thing. Once you see the performance, you can't perform with the same conviction. Watch what happens in nature when an animal becomes aware of being watched. It changes its behavior instantly. Consciousness brings self-awareness, and self-awareness disrupts authenticity in the old patterns. You're at a social gathering, and you can feel yourself about to launch into your usual charming story, the one that always gets laughs, and suddenly you stop. You realize you've told the story 100 times. You've perfected the timing, the facial expressions, and the self-deprecating punchline. You're performing yourself, and the exhaustion of maintaining that performance becomes unbearable. Consider this situation. You're with old friends who knew you as someone specific, the funny one, the ambitious one, or the responsible one. But that version of you feels like a costume that no longer fits. Every moment with them requires you to squeeze back into that old identity, and it's suffocating. So you start declining invitations, not because you don't care about them, but because you can't bear to perform the ghost of who you used to be. And this is where it gets dangerous, because society tells us that consistency in identity is a virtue, that changing who you are is flakiness or instability. But consciousness reveals that the real prison is believing you're the character rather than the awareness watching the character. This is why conscious people vanish. They're not abandoning relationships. They're abandoning false versions of themselves. And sometimes those versions are what the relationships were built upon. The third thing, which is perhaps the most insidious, is that consciousness exposes the violence hidden in normal conversation. Now, when I say violence, I don't mean physical aggression. I mean the subtle ways humans dominate, manipulate, and extract energy from each other through language while calling it connection. You start noticing how often people aren't really listening. They're waiting for their turn to talk, loading their own story and preparing their counter-argument. You see how conversations become competitions for who suffered more, who spewsier, and who has the more impressive life. You feel the hidden agenda in compliments, the status checking in casual questions, and the way people fish for validation while pretending to share. It's like suddenly being able to see the invisible strings puppeteers use. You're watching two people have what looks like a friendly chat, but you can see the power dynamics, the unspoken resentments, the ego protecting it, and the neediness masked as generosity. And once you see it, participating in it feels like volunteering for psychological warfare. I remember a woman who told me she stopped attending family dinners because she could no longer ignore the patterns. Her mother's seemingly innocent questions were actually veiled criticisms. Her brother's jokes were subtle assertions of dominance. The entire event was an elaborate dance of egos trying to establish hierarchy while maintaining the fiction of love and connection. She didn't hate her family. She just couldn't pretend she didn't see what was really happening. Think about it this way. Most human communication is like two radios on different frequencies, producing static and calling it a conversation. Conscious people start seeking signal, not static. And signal is rare. So they withdraw from the constant barrage of noise, not out of superiority, but out of preservation. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness, an antenna that's picking up what was always there but previously ignored. Here's what this all means. When you become conscious of the violence hidden in normalcy, you can't keep showing up to places where that violence is the foundation of interaction. This is the secret. You're not being antisocial. You're refusing to participate in socially acceptable forms of mutual harm. And the fourth thing, the most critical of all, is that awakening creates a different relationship with time itself. And this makes you incompatible with a world addicted to speed. Modern life is built on the premise that faster is better, that productivity is virtue, and that filling every moment with activity and stimulation is success. But consciousness slows you down. It pulls you into the present moment, where there's actually nowhere to rush to because you're already here. Imagine trying to have a deep conversation with someone who's scrolling through their phone, checking their watch, and mentally planning their next 5 moves. That's what it feels like for a conscious person trying to exist in the mainstream world. Everyone else is racing toward a finish line that doesn't exist, and you've stopped running. Not because you're lazy, but because you've realized the race itself is the problem. You start needing more space between activities, more silence between words, more emptiness between commitments. What others call boredom, you recognize as aliveness. What they call doing nothing, you experience as doing everything, being present, aware, and connected to the subtle dimension of existence that can't be perceived at high speed. I once knew someone who left a successful career in emergency medicine. People couldn't understand it. She was saving lives, making a difference, and doing important work. But she told me something profound. She said, "I realized I was moving so fast that life was happening to me, not through me. I was reacting, not responding. I was surviving, not living. And one day I understood that no amount of external success would compensate for internal absence." Here's the beautiful part. When you slow down, you become incompatible with systems designed for speed. The job that requires constant urgency starts feeling violent. The friendships that thrive on drama and crisis lose their appeal. The entertainment designed to capture attention feels like an assault. So you vanish from those systems, not because you've given up on life, but because you've finally shown up for it. The fifth thing, and this might be the most misunderstood, is that consciousness dissolves the need for external validation, which is the glue holding most social structures together. Let's be honest about what keeps people engaged in the social world: the need to be seen, to be approved of, and to be recognized as valuable. We attend events we don't enjoy because we fear being forgotten. We maintain friendships that drain us because we fear being alone. We chase achievements we don't care about because we fear being invisible. But awakening brings a strange and wonderful dissolution of that need. It's like suddenly realizing that the game you've been desperately trying to win doesn't actually have any prizes. And more importantly, doesn't have any judges. There's no one keeping score. There's no final ranking. There's just this moment and your experience of it. And the question of whether you're living truthfully or performing for an imaginary audience. Think of it as realizing you're the universe experiencing itself through a temporary human form. When that recognition really lands, the need for others to confirm your worth evaporates. Not because you've become arrogant, but because you've remembered something essential. Your value isn't determined by consensus. Your existence isn't validated by recognition. You are, whether anyone notices or not. Watch what happens when this shift occurs. The social climbing stops. The people-pleasing ends. The careful curation of image loses its urgency. And with that, the motivation to participate in most social structures disappears. You're not angry at the world for being superficial. You're simply no longer interested in trading your precious life energy for empty validation. Consider how much of social life is essentially a marketplace where people exchange validation. I'll like your post if you like mine. I'll attend your event if you attend mine. I'll listen to your problems if you listen to mine. It's not a real connection, it's a transaction disguised as a relationship, and conscious people start recognizing the difference. They'd rather have one conversation that touches truth than 100 that traffic in pleasantries and mutual performance. Even the ancient wisdom teaches us that the sage retreats not from hatred of the world, but from seeing through it. Even Jesus walked away from crowds to be alone in the wilderness. Even Buddha left the palace. This pattern repeats throughout history because consciousness and conventional society are fundamentally incompatible at a certain level of awakening. What they call antisocial is actually deeply spiritual. Your withdrawal isn't rejection, it's discernment. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming clear. There's no shame in recognizing that most of what passes for connection is actually distraction from the deeper loneliness that connection is meant to heal. So here we are, back to where we started. The more awake you become, the less the old world fits. And now you can see why. It's not one thing, it's the entire recalibration of your being. Your tolerance changes. Your identity loosens. You see the hidden violence. You slow down in a world of speed. You release the need for validation. All of these connect because consciousness isn't a thought you have, it's a frequency you become. The beautiful secret is this: you're not disappearing from the world. You're disappearing into reality. The world you're leaving behind was always a collective agreement, a shared hallucination, a stage play that seemed real because everyone committed to the performance. But reality, the actual substance of existence, the awareness that watches the play, that's what you're moving toward. And that's a solitary journey, not because you're alone, but because you're becoming whole. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are not missing out on something everyone else has figured out. You are waking up, and waking up means outgrowing the dream. This is the most natural thing in the universe. Seeds don't apologize for outgrowing their shells. Butterflies don't return to the cocoon. And you don't owe anyone your presence in a reality you've seen through. The next time you find yourself canceling plans, stepping back, and choosing solitude over performance, remember what we've explored today. You're not withdrawing from life, you're withdrawing from the imitation of life. You're not becoming less becoming more yourself than the world could ever handle. And that's not a failure of social skills. That's a triumph of consciousness. You are the universe experiencing itself, and sometimes that experience requires space from the noise to hear the signal. This is the dance we're all part of, and your steps are exactly as they should be. The vanishing isn't an ending, it's a return, and so the journey continues.